Okay. Welcome to the 2-drop card review! Let's get started. Just to clarify a little bit, I do mean 2-drop neutral minions. I do not mean every 2 mana card in the game. So, here we go. To start, our Acidic Swamp Ooze. He is a 2-drop 3/2 with a battle cry of destroy your opponent's weapon. Pretty good. He's got quite a bit of potential against classes like Shaman, Warrior, and I guess Paladin's a pretty good one too, and Rogue. Ooze is absolutely a great card. Even without that, he's still a 3/2, which is, you know, average stats for a 2-drop. So, yeah, he's a pretty good card to put in your deck, especially because, you know, it's a soulbound 2-drop that has a lot of potential, and even if it doesn't achieve that potential, it's still a 3/2, which is good. So, yeah. Good card. Good card. Next up, well, let me check something. Okay, this may seem weird to you guys, and it is a last-minute change. I'm going to go through this where I do all the soulbound cards first, just so it's easier for me to remember. So next up is Bloodfen Raptor. He is a 2-drop 3/2, who is a beast. Works okay in hunter decks because they have cards that combo off of you being in possession of beasts. That being said, if you're not a hunter, there's no reason to run a raptor. You can run an ooze instead, and it is better. Period. So, okay for hunters. Everything else, no. Next up, Bluegill Warrior. He is a 2-mana 2/1 with charge. He's also a Murloc, which means he's extra annoying. So, he's okay. He typically won't trade as well as other 2-drops, but still good for instantaneous damage and perhaps trading with, I don't know, a card that's low on health or something. His stats suffer really badly for having charge, so I don't know. I don't like him all that much, but he has situations where he's useful, so yeah. It's kind of up to you. If you're going with an aggro deck, he's not a bad pick. Next up, Frostwolf Grunt, a 2-mana 2/2 with Taunt. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Reasoning. There are 2-drops that have 3 health, and, you know, cards even above 2-drops that have more than 2 health. So, this guy is only liable to trade with another 2-drop or weaker. So he's not going to get any value higher than his own, at best. So, while he has, while he has Taunt, his stats absolutely suck for having Taunt. On top of that, there's another card that just completely outstrips this for performance. It's not soulbound, so we'll get to it in a while. Next up, Kobold Geomancer. He is a 2-mana 2/2 with spell damage +1. There's exactly one kind of deck that can use this guy. Mage. He combos extremely well with the mage card Arcane Explosion. It is a 2-mana spell that deals 1 damage to all enemy minions with the spell damage +1 from a 2-mana creature. It becomes a card that is basically a combined 4 mana to deal 2 damage to all enemy creatures. That's not terrible. I mean, you know, Holy Nova is 5 mana for that. Hellfire's 4 mana and does 3, but it does it to all minions. It's basically a Consecrate, actually, from Paladins. So, yeah. That's the only time he's useful, though. Don't run him in any other deck. Period. He's useful in mage decks with Arcane Explosion. That's it. Job's done. Next up, Murloc Tidehunter. He is a 2-mana 2/1, but he also summons that guy, a Murloc Scout. So, he's effectively a combined 3/2. However, that being said, I don't really like him. Reason for this, he's okay in Murloc decks, but again, who runs Murloc decks? That's just mean. Say you're against a mage or a druid or a rogue or anything really. Because the 3/2 stats are split up between 2 creatures, if they deal with it, like a mage could ping one of the 2 to get rid of it, and that drops off, you know, probably 2 damage, because he'd better ping the 2-1 instead of the 1-1, otherwise he's an idiot. Whereas if he were an actual 3-2, the mage would have to ping it twice, and you wouldn't get any damage reduced in that time. Druids, if you're punching it, you have to punch it twice and take 6 damage just from punching it. Now, instead, you punch one guy, and take the 2, and then punch the other guy and take 1. You take a combined 3 damage for taking out both of them. So, this guy's stats being split up are usually not that beneficial. I don't like him for that reason. Yeah. Eh. But, he's okay in Murloc decks, so if you're gonna be that guy, then use this. But please, don't be that guy. Please. Anyway. Goodbye, Scout. Oops, did not mean to click there. Next up, Novice Engineer. It is a 2-mana 1-1. Wow, crap stats for a 2-mana card. Well, it's got a Battle Cry of Draw a card, so, I mean... yeah, I don't know. It'll always get a value of at least 1 card when you play it, because you'll, you know, draw a card off of it. I don't know. This usually is not run in decks. There's a better variant of this, which is a 4-drop, so... if you need card draw, this isn't a bad way to go, but you should be able to find other ways to attain card draw in your deck than just using a Novice Engineer. So, if you're just starting out, I guess I'd recommend it in a deck, because you need all the card draw you can get, but otherwise, find a different way to get card draw, because this thing can be absolute crap. It will not trade well with really anything. I mean, it gets taken out by 1-drops. Sometimes without even killing them, so, yeah. Ugh. Anywho, next up is River Crocolisk. He is a 2-mana 2/3 beast. Kind of like a Bloodfen Raptor. There's better creatures to run than him if you're looking for a 2/3. However, he is a beast, so he's alright in Hunter decks. This guy's one of the reasons also why Frostwolf Grunt, the 2-mana 2/2 with Taunt. This is a reason why it is not played. 2 attack, 3 health. He can trade with a Frostwolf Grunt without dying. So, yeah. Okay, now we gotta go back to the top of 2-drops and start with all of these cards. What the... where'd that one guy go? One sec. I appear to have lost a card. Oh, that's because he's hiding in this corner. Okay. Sorry about that. Next up is Amani Berserker. Here we go again. Berserker. He's a 2-mana 2/3 with Enrage, plus 3 attack. We went over this in the Warrior card review, but just in case people... or just in case I have any viewers who have not checked that, Enrage means that the second he takes damage, he gets that boost. That being said, when used in something like a priest deck that will heal him, if he is healed up back to full, he will lose the Enrage. So, that's just a fun fact about Enrage. Basically, this guy can trade well with most other 2-drops, and if you're, say, a mage who can ping him, he can trade even higher than that, because suddenly when you can deal just 1 damage to him using your hero power, he becomes a 5/2 for effectively 2 mana. So, really good in mage decks, and otherwise he's still just not a bad card, so yeah, pretty good 2-drop, but it gets its max value in mage decks. Next up, Ancient Watcher. It is a 2-mana 4/5. What? A 2-mana Yeti. Well, it can't attack, so that'll put a damper on things. That being said, there are decks that still run this card, because the stats are absolutely insane. If you give him Taunt or can silence him, then he becomes a lot more valuable, you know? If he has Taunt, they've got to... so your opponent has to deal with a 4/5 before they can attack you with their minions. And if he's silenced, he loses the can't attack effect. So, yeah. I'm probably going a little fast. Oh well. I guess that happens. So, that's Ancient Watcher. Crazy stats, but Only certain decks can run him. Next up, Blood Mage Thalnos. He is a 2-mana 1/1 who is a legendary. However, he has spell damage +1 and a death rattle of draw a card. He's basically a fusion of Cobalt Geomancer with a Novice Engineer. He's actually not bad. Having that kind of cheap spell damage plus card draw in one card, even if you can only have him once in a deck, is pretty good. So, out of legendaries I would recommend getting for new players, he is definitely not one of them. However, if you've already got a lot of really powerful legendaries to use in decks, you know, he's not a bad way to go. Not bad at all. Mages and warlocks like this guy. Especially mages. Yep. But any deck that runs spells, which is most of them. So, Blood Mage Thanos is pretty good. Next up, Bloodsail Raider. Gain attack equal to the attack of your weapon. It is a 2-mana 2/3 pirate. Being a pirate isn't really that significant. Nobody's made pirate decks. I mean, they just don't work that well. It's kind of like a way worse version of Murlocs, so that's pirates for you. They combo well with weapons. Okay. Anyway. Where was I going? This card is really good in warrior decks and in paladin decks because of True Silver's Champion and Arcanite Reaper. You can, on turn 6, summon this thing as a 6/3 for paladins, or on turn 7 as a 7/3 for warriors. So, it's got a lot of potential for a 2-drop. That being said, if you're not running a weapon-heavy deck, don't run this. There's better cards. So, good in weapon decks, otherwise not. Next up, Crazed Alchemist. Hey, it's my logo! I love this card. Just because there's so many ways to use him, and none of them are technically correct, or incorrect. He's a 2-mana 2/2, so his stats can be looked at as rather weak for a 2-drop. His battle cry is to swap the attack and health of a minion. This is really fun when you've got cards that have high health. And it's especially useful in Priest, where you have cards like Shadow Word Death and Shadow Word Pain. Most cards that have 4 attack, which Priest has trouble dealing with, will have either like 3 or 5 health. Most cards with 4 attack don't also have 4 health. So, this guy's a fun way in some Priest decks to make sure that your Shadow Word Deaths and Pains stay viable answers, even against cards that have 4 attack. However, he becomes really useless when you don't have that kind of opportunity to play him. So very often he's almost used as a spell instead of as a minion. Just something to be aware of if you want to run him in your deck. He's almost more of a spell than a creature. So, playing him as a 2/2, not going to happen as much. Playing him for his effect, have fun with that, because that's a lot of fun, I can personally tell you. Not amazing. I don't recommend him in anything but Priest. Yeah, and even in Priest it's iffy. Anyway. Moving on, Direwolf Alpha. He is a 2-mana 2/2 beast. However, his text makes him far better. Adjacent minions have +1 attack. This means that this card is effectively a 2-drop 4/2. That is the highest natural attack you will ever see on 2-drops, unless you count Ancient Watcher. But, you know, you have to silence him first. This guy, you have to do nothing but play more creatures. So he's extremely strong, especially in rush decks, because of the text, you know? Giving adjacent creatures bonus attack. So, yeah. That's Direwolf Alpha. Next up, Doomsayer. He is a 2-drop 0/7. His text, at the start of your turn, destroy all minions. This means that, when you play it, you end your turn, it goes through your opponent's turn to give them 1 turn to kill it, and then when it rolls back over to your turn, it destroys all minions. This card usually can be dealt with. The funniest thing is when you get a Crazed Alchemist on this guy. You switch his attack and health, boom, he becomes a 7-0, he's dead. I love doing that to people. That's one of the reasons Crazed Alchemist is just so fun. That being said, he's often used in Freeze Mage decks, where the opponent, or the Freeze Mage at least, will use a card like Frost Nova or Blizzard to freeze, the opponent's whole board, and then they'll drop Doomsayer, so your opponent has to use spells and just really start flinging them to deal with Doomsayer. Because he can't use his creatures, they're all frozen. So yeah, that's a pretty nasty combo, but yeah, when you don't use him in a deck that can guarantee that your opponent won't attack it, then it becomes rather a crap card since it has 0 attack. It's not going to trade with anything. So, he's useful in Freeze Mage, that's about it. Next up, Fairy Dragon. 2 mana 3/2, can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, most annoying little bugger in the game. You can't, before I go there, this does not apply to the Rogue and Druid hero powers, since both of them allow the hero itself to attack something. The hero power doesn't target the Fairy Dragon, it's the attack that targets it. So, Rogues and Druids can still hit it and kind of slowly deal with it, but you take a lot of damage doing it that way, so yeah. That being said, it only can't be targeted. If you have board clear like Holy Nova or Consecrate, or the, Kobold plus Arcane Explosion, that all works on it. Anything that's AoE will still hurt this. You just can't, target it. So answers like Holy Smite, or Frostbolt, or Hammer of Wrath, or something, I don't know. Just cards like that, you can't target him with it. So, he's a pretty good card in aggro decks, because your opponent can't answer it. They have to use a creature for it, and if you get him out before your opponent gets an answer out, then he becomes all that much harder to answer. So, he's a pretty good 3/2. Pretty good. Next up, Ironbeak Owl. 2 mana 2/1, Beast. Battlecry, silence a minion. This card is used to combo quite annoyingly with Ancient Watchers. Yeah. It's one of the biggest combos used in Handlock. So, standalone, Ironbeak Owl, not that great. Comboed with Ancient Watcher, he's a pain in the butt. Since he only has 1 health, most decks can deal with him. Rogues, easily. Rogues, mages, warriors, druids, paladins, meh. Yeah. So, good with Ancient Watcher. Otherwise, eh. Next up, Knife Juggler. He is a 2 mana 3/2. After you summon a minion, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. How do I explain this card? Possibly the best 2-drop in the game, I suppose. He's just a pain in the butt, because if he is summoned early and you don't get an answer to him, let's say you play a creature instead to try to answer him. In an aggro deck, your opponent drops, another 2 or 3 creatures, and suddenly this guy's doing 5 damage or more per turn. He's the only 2-drop that could have higher natural damage per turn than Direwolf Alpha. Assuming, of course, you don't silence an Ancient Watcher again. Those things are pains in the butt when silenced. But yeah, Knife Juggler is an extremely good 3/2, especially in aggro-style decks, because you will just throw knives like crazy and people will hate you for it. They will absolutely hate you. Yeah. Next up, Loot Hoarder. He has a 2 mana 2/1 with a Death Rattle, draw a card. This is one of the reasons Novice Engineer isn't used all that often as well. Excuse me. Since he has to attack, he's liable to make better trades than the Novice Engineer will. And on top of that, although you don't draw a card immediately when he's summoned, the Death Rattle of drawing a card still means you can draw one. So, I mean, unless your opponent wants to silence him, which actually is not worth it. Yeah, he'll get pretty good cards for it. He'll get pretty good value. So, yep. And don't forget to roll need. Yeah, when you summon him, he sounds like he says, mind if I roll weed. But he's saying need. Get your minds out of the gutter. Next up, Lorewalker Cho. He's a 2-mana 0/4 legendary creature. He's a pain in the butt for spell flinging decks. Reason being, whenever a player casts a spell, put a copy into the other player's hand. If you are a deck that will just fling spells back and forth like some rogues do, miracle, this can be a card that's very interesting in that you can overload your opponent's hand and start causing them to discard cards all the time. So, yeah. He's just a... how do I explain him? He's annoying. He can bite you in the butt very often. He's extremely funny to use Crazed Alchemist on. And unless you're planning to play him in a deck that will purposely overload your opponent's hand, he's actually not all that useful. Because he's going to hurt you as much as he hurts the opponent. So, yeah. I don't know. He's decent in a deck that runs just crazy numbers of minions, since you can steal your opponent's answers every time they answer your board. But yeah. It's Lorewalker Cho. I don't recommend grabbing him as a legendary if you're in desperate need of one. He's not useful in that many decks. Next up, Mad Bomber. He's a 2-mana 3/2 with a battle cry of deal 3 damage randomly split between all other characters. Yes, this includes heroes. Mad Bomber is the biggest hit and miss card in the game. A good Mad Bomber can actually straight up win you the game, and a bad one can lose you the game. So, yeah, don't run him. He's too RNG. Too RNG based. I don't like him. But then again, that's because RNG always screws me over. So, I don't know. Mana Addict, a 2-mana 1/3. Whenever you cast a spell, gain +2 attack this turn. This card isn't typically all that useful because every time it's your opponent's turn, this card will go back to being a 1/3 and your opponent should be able to answer it pretty easily with just about any other 2-drop that's decent in the game. However, in Miracle Rogues, if you can give this thing stealth and then fling spells the next turn, I've seen Mana Addicts that go up to like, you know, +16 attack in one turn and become a 17/3 and just smack you in the face. It's got crazy potential, but the only deck this will be all that useful in is Miracle Rogue, because you can fling spells like crazy. And in a non-spell flinging deck that can't give this thing stealth, which only Miracle Rogue can do, this card won't trade well very often at all. So, unless you're Miracle Rogue, don't run this. Next up, Mana Wraith. 2-mana 2/2, all minions cost 1 mana more. Yes, your own. Yeah, I don't like him, because he makes your own minions cost more. So this guy's as liable to bite you in the butt as he is to bite your opponent. So, that being said, he also doesn't have the best stats for a 2-drop, so not that great. I mean, I guess he's okay against aggro decks, because all of their minions will cost more, but I don't know. I don't like him. It's up to you guys to decide if you want to use him, but I do not like him. Anyway, next up, Master Swordsmith, a 2-mana 1/3. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1 attack. He gets traded with too easily, just like most other 1/3s. Yes, he has damage potential, but he's not going to trade well as a card, and yeah, he's not even a threat. Like, doing 1 damage per turn, yeah. I don't know. It's just not a great card. Don't use him. Just leave it there. Don't use him. Next up, Millhouse Mana Storm. He's a 2-mana 4/4. Pretty good. stats for a 2-mana card. However, his battle cry, enemy spells cost 0 next turn. He can really bite you in the butt. Funniest thing I've ever seen is an arena run, since you can get, any number of cards that are the same copy in arena. There is actually a video out there, I highly recommend you guys watch it, where someone drops a Millhouse Mana Storm turn 2. Their opponent has 3 Pyroblasts in their hand. Since those all cost 0 mana, the guy gets nuked for 30 in 1 turn. It's absolutely ridiculous and hilarious. So, Millhouse, he can bite you in the butt, and he invites your opponent to do that. So, yeah, be very careful with Millhouse. I don't run him for that reason. He's just too likely to bite you back. Anyway, next up, Nat Pagal. 2 mana 0/4. At the start of your turn, you have a 50% chance to draw an extra card. Pagal's pretty good. He's pretty good. Just because he can draw a lot of different cards for you, so... A lot of different cards, yeah. He's good as a source of card draw. And having 4 health, he's hard to deal with for other 2-drop creatures. On top of that, if you can protect him, he can draw you, a lot of cards. So, he's a pretty good form of card draw. I don't know why he's not run anymore. He used to be run in most, pro-grade decks, but now he's not. So, I suppose it's because he's unreliable with the card draw. But yeah, that's Pagal. He's a decent legendary, but again, there are more powerful ones I recommend you get before you start going into him. Yeah, just don't get 2-drop legendaries until you have some really powerful legendaries that are a little more expensive. Anyway. Next up, Pint-Sized Summoner. A 2-mana 2/2, the first minion you play each turn cost 1 less. Not great. I mean, it could save you a mana each turn, but on the other hand, Pint Size isn't liable to trade well with other 2-drops or 3-drops. And you're not going to keep her alive all that often. She'll usually end up dying. So, that text isn't even going to be all that beneficial to you. It's just an unfortunate truth. So not that great a card. Next up, Sun Fury Protector. This is why Frostwolf Grunt absolutely sucks. 2 mana 2/3, that's better stats, with Battlecry, give adjacent minions taunt. So this thing can give 2 minions taunt, and it is a 2/3. Frostwolf Grunt can absolutely suck it. Yeah. So Sun Fury Protector is a pretty good card in certain decks. Anything that's trying to go counter aggro, stuff like that. Yeah. It's just a card with quite a bit of potential. Kind of like with Crazed Alchemist, though. Half the time this card will be played almost as a spell to give minions taunt, rather than as a 2/3, so... yeah. That's that. Next up, Wild Pyromancer. I love this guy. He's a 2 mana 3/2. After you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to all minions. In a priest deck, he's absolutely hilarious, because oftentimes you can buff his health and heal him and do all these things to keep him alive forever. And this guy could deal 5 damage to the whole board, over the course of his life, or something like that. And he's ridiculous in priest. I don't recommend him in anything that isn't priest, really. He's too liable to kill himself. Even after just casting 1 spell, he's down to being a 3/1, and there's plenty of classes which can deal 1 damage to a minion. So, yeah. If you're not a priest, I don't recommend running him. But in a priest deck, he can be hilariously good. So, yep. Next up, Youthful Brewmaster. He is a 2 mana 3/2 with a battle cry of return a friendly minion from the battlefield to your hand. I don't know. He's not used all that often. Here's the reason. His battle cry requires that you do bounce a minion. So, if unless you play him just as a 3-2, in which case you don't utilize his battle cry, he's going to bounce something. And if you already have minions on the field when you're playing him, he's also going to bounce something. So unless you actually want to bounce a card, he's not useful, because there are better cards for being a 3-2. And on top of that, it can be detrimental to bounce a card. So he's more useful as a spell than as a 2-drop. So, yeah. That's why he's not run. It's just, he's basically a sap. Except he works on your own minions instead of your opponent's. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't recommend him. There are very few decks that can actually make use of a card that, you know, loses board control for them. So, yeah, that's Youthful Brewmaster. Anyway, that's it for the 2-drop card review today. Hope you guys enjoyed and I didn't bore you to tears. If I did, leave some hate mail. I'll be sure to get to it. And yeah, so, thanks for watching.